So thanks for being here with us, obviously.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
So I study with Thaddeus at the main campus, and he hipped me a lot to the power of pentatonics, which is something that is near and dear to me as a blues player and near yourself.
Sure.
So what you wanted to do is we wanted to talk about how we can use those to our advantage in all genres and all music.
Sure. Well, the course is specifically about funk, rock, R&B soloing, the course that I authored. And one of the things that I like about the pentatonic is the accessibility to all, it's like all cultures. You know, we love the pentatonic. You know, you can go anywhere in the world and you can find it in Chinese music, you can find it in basically music all over the world. What I find in the context of R&B and funk is that it's a very accessible sound. You don't necessarily have to use it, you know, in a traditional way, the way like most people, if we're in the key of A, we use an A pentatonic, you know, right, whether you're playing rock, blues, or country. What's great about R&B and funk is that it's a little bit on the progressive side, so you can actually sort of use the pentatonic in ways that's not traditional, and you can get some more, what I call more expensive sounds, you know. And by that I mean, without going into the territory of jazz, without becoming a jazz player, you can use the pentatonic in ways that make you sound a little more progressive, but still not stepping outside of the genre of, in this case, you know, funk and R&B. So we'll do a little demonstration, and I'll start off with just sort of minor sounds, you know. Usually if you have a minor chord, let's just start off with a G minor, and I'm going to use my little freeze pedal here to sustain a G minor sound. That's my organ. There we go. Now, most people would use a pentatonic on this chord, whether it's a groove or a vamp, from the root. One really easy thing that you can do is instead of thinking about it from G, we're going to go up a fifth to the note D, and now we're actually going to play a D minor pentatonic. Now, it might look like I'm still playing around the position of G, but just to be a little clearer, I'm going to actually play it right here. And listen to how this sounds over the underlying G minor harmony. It sounds right? It sounds like I'm still playing in the same key. It still sounds right. Now, you might be saying, well, why does that work? You know, when you do that, when you're in the key of G and you play a D minor pentatonic, what you do is you get a couple extra what we call tensions in jazz music, and specifically you get, you know, in the key of G you get 9, which is our A, and you get 11, which is our C, and it just gives you a color that's slightly different from playing it from the root, which would be as opposed to slightly different color. Now you might ask, well, how does this become more intuitive, you know? Well, I would say the first thing that you should do, and first thing everyone should do, is, since pentatonic is such a big part of guitarists everywhere in the world, I would say you have to learn all 5 positions of your pentatonic. You know, it's one of the scales that you absolutely have to learn. And in the key of G, really quick, this might be a review for a lot of people, but I'll go through the 5 positions really quickly. Now that's starting on the root. This is starting on the flat third. Continuing on the 4th. Sorry. Flat 7. Now, most people probably already know that. Getting to know those positions is fundamental. And then after you get to know the positions, you might say, well, it still sounds like I'm playing a scale, you know. How do I make it sound a little more musical? Well, I would say, first of all, memorize those positions. Secondly, I would say what you can do is play what we call permutations, or we can, basically we can vary the scale. It can be in a consistent way. One of the very popular ones that you probably heard is a... can't even do that simple. Let's try a little more complicated one. You know, or even fifths.
Are there examples of guitar players, just so people out there who may not be familiar with this?
With a pentatonic?
Can you think of like players that do a lot of that they
oh,
can
goodness,
maybe
right off the
reference?
top of my head, I can think of players like, even outside of the genre of R&B and funk, I would say Eric Johnson, Bonamassa, you know, cats like that who use a pentatonic a lot in their playings, and if you permutate it, it can sound like so much more than those 5 notes. Those would be some great examples of great pentatonic permutators, you know. So I would say after you have an idea and a good handle on the scale, and once you've memorized that, then to get into this idea of creating these new sounds that we call superimposing to get more expensive sounds, then you can just think in terms of one simple thing. Like, let's say we're playing a G minor chord, then you can think 5. And if you think 5 in the key of G minor, then you're thinking D. So instantly, just from that one thought, 5, D, you get 2 tensions. You know, you get 9 and you get 11, you know.
And it does add a lot of color to what you're doing, absolutely.
And without actually going outside of the genre, do you know, like, because if you're playing, certainly if you're playing a song that's more in the way of country, you don't want to start playing bebop licks on tensions and stuff like that. It just sounds a little out of place. And so that's the quickest one. And I would say the one thing to remember is that this is for grooves or for progressions that are static. So I wouldn't say look at every piece of music and every time you see a minor chord, this is something you can do. For the most part, that particular superimposition, which is up a fifth, is going to work. But try and, you know, sort of use it more for a situation where the groove is continuous and you're trying to create interest. So you can go back and forth from playing, say, over the G to thinking D, you know, for a second. And just with that thought, you can create a different sound.
Are there no-nos in terms of like the scale degrees of the pentatonic scale where you shouldn't start the pentatonic?
Well, I would say that for minor, well, we'll cover the minor. I would say the minor, a very, very common superimpositions that I use are 2, which gives you a Dorian sound. When you take that same G minor chord, and then instead of playing 5, which would be the D, I'm going to play 2. So listen to how this sounds now. Now, that gives you a Dorian sound. So let me do that again. A little bit stronger there. As opposed to 5. As opposed to 1. Two. So you can literally go back and forth between these sounds. And someone will say, well, you know, if I take all of those 3 superimpositions, I just wind up with a Dorian scale. So why not just play a Dorian scale? Well, I think it's the power of your intention in saying, I am deliberately going to play this scale that gives it this kind of sound. Like, I'm going to play Dorian sound. You know, I'm going to play on the 5th, you know. So those are some really simple superimpositions that, since, especially in R&B, if you're soloing over funk R&B, funk rock, a lot of times it's over a minor groove. You just might have a, you know, Let's try that again. Loop. Loop refuses to function at this time.
Technology's awesome.
Technology doesn't work well. Okay, all right. Let's forget the loop for a lot of times in R&B. You'll have the same groove.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you'll have like say a G minus 7 groove.
We've all done that.
When I do it old school,
hours.
like actually play it, you know, where you have this kind of groove, and it's constant, and then you're called upon to solo over this, and you're like, well, how do I create interest over this groove? Just imagine this is a rhythmic groove, you know? What I'm doing right there is going back and forth between all three of those superimpositions, just to create a little bit of color.